To give a little bit of an introduction, even though
Okay.
I'm off microphone. It is the 2nd of March, 1997. We're here with Uncle Arthur and Auntie Florence, and we're going to talk a little bit about Rosen family history. And the other thing we should add is there's a big move afoot in the next week or so. You guys are moving to San Luis Obispo.
Right.
So we're here for the day, and we're going to talk a little bit. So Uncle Arthur,
Fine.
what's your earliest recollection of your own parents? And then you can go back and talk about Poland and whatever you want.
Fine. My earliest, if you want to start in where my earliest recollection, I should say, of my parents is perhaps in Petaluma when I was about 4 or 5 years old. Is my first recollection of my mother and father. And I remember when my brother Manny was born, I was 7 years old. My father bought some lamb and he boiled it. Lamb is not supposed to be boiled.
No.
It was horrible, horrible. That is ingrained in my mind. And I remember as preschool, before I went to school, my father had an old 1917 Chevrolet touring sedan, and he would go from ranch to ranch all the way to Occidental, California, and the roads were treacherous in those days, treacherous, to little towns called Marshall,
Well, what year is this, do you think?
about 1920. My father would go to these ranches and solicit mattress renovation. My father was a mattress maker, and the ranch wasn't didn't the ranch didn't bring in enough income, so he went out and solicited renovating mattresses. And as I said, in these little towns called Twofold, Marshall, Occidental, Tamales, Bodega Bay, Bodega, all in that area in Sonoma County. And I would go with him many times. And
And how old were you?
at the time, I was about 5 years old.
Now, what kinds of... I've always been told that my grandfather, Grandpa Charlie, had all kinds of jobs. What are the jobs you remember him having?
The only jobs my father had. First of all, my father came here from Poland in 1912. He was brought here by his uncle Morris Spiegelman, who was sort of the patriarch of the Spiegelman family. My grandmother, my father's mother, her maiden name was Spiegelman. And so Uncle Morris Spiegelman, who became a very, very, very wealthy man because he was one of the co-founders of Serta Mattress Company, which is very internationally known. He was one of the founders of it here in San Francisco in 1907. So my Uncle Morris, or great Uncle Morris, would bring over one nephew from each of his spouses in Poland. My father being one of the nephews. He brought over another, my father's cousins, Joe Goldberg. He brought over Milton Young. He brought over a number of nephews and taught him the mattress business. My Uncle Morris left Serta, or Simon Mattress Company at the time, because his partner, Simon, had 4 sons and Morris Spiegelman had 3 sons. So they said to each other, "We have 7 sons. How are we going to divide the leadership of this company between 7 sons?" So they split apart. My uncle founded the Continental Mattress Manufacturing Company and the Occidental Furniture Manufacturing Company. So some of the nephews, he taught the upholstering business, like my cousin Joe Goldberg. My father was taught the mattress business. So in 1919, there was a big boom of people going to Petaluma. The egg business was tremendous. During World War II, which ended in 1918, eggs were selling for $1 a dozen. And you know what $1 a dozen?
World War One, you meant?
World War One. I meant, pardon me. Eggs at $1 a dozen today would be like $10 a dozen.
At least, yeah.
So people started, or they could make a fortune in Petaluma. So many local San Francisco Jews, especially immigrants, moved up to Petaluma. And he bought a little chicken ranch, 5 acres, and things didn't go too well. In those days, they did not have vaccinations for chickens. If they would get chicken pox or they would get a disease, he would lose a whole flock. And then the company store really owned you because you would buy feed from them on the come. That is, when the chickens are big enough and you can sell the chickens or the eggs, you'd repay the store, the grain company or the mill, the milling company. And when you couldn't pay them, they would repossess your ranch. So my father went bankrupt and lost the ranch. We moved to the city of Petaluma, and my father would open up a mattress manufacturing company. And that's what my father did. That was his profession, or if not profession, what's another word? Business, all of his life in the mattress business.
Now,
My mother,
I was just going to ask, where were you born?
I was born in San Francisco in 1915. My mother, we moved back from Petaluma in 1925. My mother opened up a little grocery store on Fulton Street. My mother ran that, and my father opened up a mattress renovating store on Divisadero Street.
Do you remember the cross streets, Fulton and...
Yes, Fulton, near practically the corner of Lyon Street.
Uh-huh. And on Divisadero?
And my father's store was on Divisadero near Pine Street. And they did quite well. My father developed quite a good business until the Great Depression came along and hurt everyone. But I want to go back further than that. I want to go back to my father's parents. I want to go back to the Rosenbaum. My father's family's name was Rosenbaum. My father shortened it when he came to this country in 1912 to Rosen. But the family's name was Rosenbaum. My father's name was, in Jewish, Yosef Menachem Rosenbaum, or Joseph Manuel Rosenbaum. And Uncle Manny is named after this man. Our grandfather, my grandfather, was the youngest of 3 brothers. They owned a mill.
What were their names? All
Rosenbaum.
No,
The names were Yankel, Azriel, and Yosef Menachem. And Yosef Menachem was the youngest of the 3 brothers, and they had 1 sister. I don't know her. I don't remember her name. I think it was Rachel. My grandfather was the youngest of 3 brothers, and at that time, Poland was part of Russia. One person in the family had to serve in the Russian army. My grandfather, being the youngest, was chosen to go into the Russian army. And he was home on leave one time. He got married, and he was home on leave, and my father was conceived during that leave. Mm-hmm. Came 1904 and 1905, Russia and Japan went to war, so they called up all the reserves, all the people that had served in the army, whether you're 35, 40, 45 years of age, they called them up. So my grandfather was called up as a soldier in the Russian-Japanese War. He and his wife, my grandmother's name was Enya, and your mother, Jeffrey, was named after Enya, which was my father's mother. Her maiden name was Spiegelman. A family of 8 brothers and sisters, a very, very well thought of family, very high in the social world, and the Rosenbaums weren't quite in the same bracket. And the Rosenbaums owned a mill on the Bug River in Poland, on the Bug River, and the water power created this mill so they could grind wheat into flour. And after World War One, they put in a generator and supplied power to the small city of Loszyce in Poland.
Do you remember any other names of the towns or the villages
Yes,
nearby?
During the time that Russia had occupied this part of Poland, they had what they called gubernias. A gubernia was like we have counties here in United States. My father was born in a county gubernia called Siedlce, and there were small communities there with lots of Jewish people in these small shtetls. You know where a shtetl is?
Mm-hmm.
And my father was born in a town called Loszyce, which was in the county of Siedlce.
Do you know the year of his birth?
Hmm?
Do you know the year of his birth?
My grandmother and grandfather were born in the early 1860s. The family, the Rosenbaum and Spiegelman families had intermarried from the time of about Napoleon's time. Napoleon went through Poland into occupied Russia in the early part of the 1800s, about 1804 and 5. And my history or my family tree goes back to about that time. And the Spiegelmans and the Rosenbaums were intermarried constantly in all those years. My great-great-great-grandfather married a Spiegelman, or a Spiegelman would marry a Rosenbaum, and it went down, all the way down. And my grandmother, Anya Spiegelman, and my grandfather, Joseph Menachem Rosenbaum, were first cousins. Mm-hmm. They were first cousins, and they got married.
But that was the tradition then, of course.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That was.
These were probably all arranged marriages.
Of course they were arranged. My father had 3 sisters and 1 brother. The brother's name was named Loser, or Lazar. English would be Lazar. He died as a young man in his teens or early 20s from epilepsy. He had 3 sisters. One of them left Poland in 1937 and went to Argentina. The other 2 sisters remained in Poland and were wiped out in the Holocaust. They and their entire families, every one.
Do you know, because that was something, I remember you mentioned that last time we spoke, and I think no one in our family really knew that we did lose some family members.
Oh, yes, we did. Mm-hmm. We lost, as I say, my father's 2 sisters and their children, their husbands, everyone. The one that left Poland and to Argentina in 1937, she and 2 children, her husband, that was my uncle, left Poland in the late 1920s, and in 1937 he brought his wife to Argentina with 2 of the younger children. His oldest daughter, who is Sarah and lives in Argentina, left Poland in July of 1939. That's just about a month before Hitler invaded Poland. Mm-hmm. Hitler invaded Poland September 1st, and she left about July 15th. She went to Genoa, Italy, and got a ship there and went to Argentina. Boy. Just weeks before Hitler invaded Poland.
Now, how was our family very religious, or were they more secular?
No, they were religious. They weren't nationalistic type of. They weren't
Zionists.
No,
even at that
no,
time?
They were just religious Jews that observed all the holidays. My father went to yeshiva until he was 21 years of age.
You did?
He did.
Uh-huh.
They were religious Jews. I don't think they were fanatics, like absolute fanatics, but my father was very, very, very well learned in the scriptures and in the Torah. He knew most of it by heart, absolutely, because he went, as I say, to yeshiva until he was 21 years of age. And when he was 21, his uncle Morris brought him here to the United States in 1912. Now, the other side of the family, my mother's, my Zimmerman side of the family, and by the way, the name was in Poland was Zimmerman, not Zimmerman, but Zimmerman, ZYberman, Zimmerman. My grandfather, my mother's father, and his wife got married when he was 13 years old. On his bar mitzvah day, he got married to an older girl, 15 years of age.
God, what a ceremony that must have been.
Yes, on his bar mitzvah day, he got married to my bubba. That was your mother's grandmother. And they had eight children. My mother was about in the middle. The oldest daughter, it was Esther Schandel, which is Jeanette is named after her, or my sister Jeanette, your aunt. She died when she was about 29 years of age and left 3 small children. And my grandmother raised...
How did she die?
I think what they called consumption, which is like tuberculosis, TB now, but they called it consumption in those days, a disease of the lungs. And as I say, she left 3 small children, and my grandmother raised the 3 small children and her youngest son, because the other kids had left already. So she had 4 children, and all the way through World War I, and Poland was the Eastern Front, and they lived on that Eastern Front, fighting between the Germans and the Russians on that Eastern Front in Poland in 1915, 16, 17, 18 was terrible, absolutely terrible. You can't imagine how bad it was. My grandfather, who was married at 13, was a sofer or a scribe. He wrote the Torah, and he died at the age of 45.
What was his name?
His name was Alter Ben Sion, the man I'm named after. Alter Ben Sion. And he died at age 45 in about 1911 or 12. And my mother left Poland in 1912 and went to New York. Her older brother, Uncle Shia, or Sam, is the one that brought her here to this country. He had come to the United States about 1906 or 7. Because in those days, you had to have a sponsor, somebody that brought you over here, because the government didn't support you like they do now. Nowadays, you live on SSI and all kinds of welfare and so forth. In those days, they didn't know anything about those kind of things. So my mother was brought over by her older brother and lived in New York for about 2 years and came to San Francisco.
Now, how old was she when she came over?
She was 18.
So that must have been quite a traumatic trip for an 18-year-old.
Yeah, 18-year-old girl. She came over with her brother, Uncle Benny. They came together.
And of course, these crossings are by ship.
Oh,
So they
terrible.
take-
In the 3rd class, in the hold, oh, you can't imagine how dirty and...
Did she used to tell stories about the journey?
Oh, yes.
Or was it something she didn't mention?
She didn't mention it, but unless I always used to question her about everything.
So that's how you learned all
That's
this.
how I learned everything. Is my mother used to call me the questionnaire.
I thought my mother was bad, but
No,
I can see
that's in the
it
genes.
runs in the family.
So she came here in 1912 and lived in New York till about 1914, and came out to San Francisco, where an arranged marriage was made between your grandfather Charlie and Grandma Sarah.
I didn't know that was arranged.
Oh yes,
So there's all kinds of things.
yes,
you
I
learn.
know. In fact, I knew the man that arranged it. His name was Mr. Kaufman.
And well, we better thank him somewhere along the
Right,
line, or his
right.
family is descended.
So my parents got married in 1915.
Now, was that arranged? Let me ask you: was that arranged while Sarah was still in New York?
No.
It was after. She
Oh,
arrived
when
here.
she got here. It was arranged when she got here. Told my father, told the family, or that they know of a beautiful young lady. They'd like to meet a nice young Jewish man, so they arranged it. And
Was it done through a synagogue or an organization?
no,
or just
through
the-
an individual.
Like the community got.
No. The community had nothing to do with it. In those days, communities, these were shatrins. You heard of the word shatrin. was Fiddler on the Roof. There was a woman that made arranged marriages.
Uh-huh.
That's what these were arranged, not through any synagogues or any organizations. Nowadays they have singles groups and all that.
Yeah.
No, these were
This
just
is the
individuals.
old-fashioned.
I know of a nice young lady. You maybe know a nice young man, something like that. So, and my mother had, there were 8 brothers and sisters. I told you the oldest sister died when she was 29. The next one in line was Uncle Shia, or Sam. He's the one that came to New York and brought my mother over. The next one after that was a brother called Frum Hersh. Ephraim, in English, Ephraim. You heard of that name, Ephraim.
Uh-huh.
He was murdered by the Bolsheviks in 1919 when they overran Poland. After the war, there was a civil war, and they overran Poland, and they killed. He had a beard. They burned his beard off, and killed him in 1919. He was married, had no children.
I guess because he was Jewish, or
Yeah, I guess so. They killed lots of Jews. Lots of Jews were killed in these pogroms. The next one in line was Uncle Benny, who was the one that my mother came to the United States with. My mother was the next one in line after Uncle Benny. And after that was Uncle Yankel, which is Jacob Zimmerman, that's the father of Arthur and Hershey. And the next one after that was the next one was Itzel, who was left in Poland, and he and his wife and 7 children were wiped out in the Holocaust. My mother lost a brother and his wife and 7 children. And the youngest was Uncle Sidney. I don't know if you remember Uncle Sidney.
yeah.
He's the one that was raised by my grandmother with her 3 grandchildren.
Right, and he lived in Petaluma for a while.
No. He
That's
never.
another-
He never lived in Petaluma.
Is that the other? Isn't there another Uncle Sidney too, who's from Petaluma?
Uncle Sidney? You mean Uncle Sidney Bronstein?
No, another one.
No.
Was this Uncle Sidney? Did he have an upholstery shop? on
That's the
Market
one.
Street? Okay.
That's the one. That's right. Good for you.
Which is actually where we had dinner for Valentine's Day in what's now the Zuni Cafe.
It was sick. He had a 1666 Market Street.
Which is, I think, Goffman Market.
I don't know. But it's many years ago that he had this upholstery store in San Francisco, and did very, very well. He invested very wisely in apartment building, and a big apartment building on Chestnut and Van Ness Avenue. Very good area, and it supported him and his wife in very good stead. He became very, very, very philanthropic, this Uncle Sidney, because he did so well in this apartment building that he bought. And he's the one that died just, in the last 5 or 6 years. He was the youngest of all the 8 children. My grandmother, Bubba, she's the one that came to the United States with Uncle Sidney and the 3 grandchildren in about 1921 or 1922. Came here, and she rented a flat, so she had her son and her grandson, who were old enough to get jobs, so they supported my grandmother in a flat. She did the cooking. She was like the mother. She was a mother of 1 and the grandmother of three others, 2 girls and Abe. Abe Gayer was my cousin. His mother died when she was 29. His father had come to Detroit earlier than that, before his wife died. But he didn't have he had nothing to do with his kids or his family, so they came with their grandmother. Abe went to work for my Uncle Yankel, who was a painting contractor, and in 1941, Abe was on a scaffold painting a house, and a motorcycle went by and caught one of the ropes and pulled the scaffold away from the building, and my cousin Abe fell to the ground and got killed.
Jesus, what a story.
Yeah.
I never knew that one.
And his 2 sisters, one was Frances Resnick, who's still alive. She must be in her late 80s. She lives in Detroit. And her youngest sister was Sylvia Hamroll. I don't know if you remember Sylvia Hamroll. Do you know Charlotte
Mm-hmm.
Heyman? Charlotte Hyman or Heyman?
Hyman, yeah.
That was her mother.
Uh-huh. Now tell us, I don't know, something about the things you... Here, let me... Hold on a sec.
Fine.
Now, just, we're very interested, I think, also in the European history. Is there other things you recall, other stories that maybe your parents told you about what they remembered in Poland, or did they choose to sort of forget their time?
No, they didn't. They didn't try to wipe out memories or anything like that. Although I will say my father wasn't as talkative or reminisce about his childhood. My mother would tell me much more than my father. Or I asked her because a mother and son get close, or I had more time to talk to her. But I learned much more from her than I did from my father. Um, my mother comes from the area you were in, Lublin.
Right.
That was also Lublin was a county, and she comes from a small town in this Lubliner Gubernia. And another interesting thing that I found when you sent me that material about Poland, that Chelm, you heard of Chelm, is in Lublin Gubernia, the same Gubernia as my mother's from, but they speak differently, a different dialect than my mother spoke, a different Yiddish dialect. And those were the people that come that are very, very naive. You heard the story about Chelmner.
Go on now, tell us.
Well, there's an old expression among Jewish people that Chelmner Narunim, a nar is a fool. Narunim is the plural of nar. And these people from Chelm are supposed to be very, very foolish people or very naive people.
Simple.
Yeah, and I have an aunt. That came from Chelm. Uncle Benny's wife came from Chelm. You remember Herman died? His mother was from Chelm.
So did they get teased about this all the time?
Well, I don't know if he got teased in front of him, but behind their backs, they always used to say, "Oh, she's from Chelm." It was kind of a joke because they're supposed to. And she was I want to tell you, if I've never been there, I don't know anything about it, but from what they tell me, she was a typical person from Chelm. She was so naive, absolutely naive. Isn't that right? You remember Auntie Bertha? She just. I was going to tell you, my grandmother had two sisters and one brother, and their maiden name was Tucker. My mother's mother, her maiden name was Tucker. There was one brother and three sisters. My grandmother was the middle sister. The oldest sister was Elke Rosenbaum. Now, don't confuse this with my father's side of Rosenbaum. This was another Rosenbaum family.
Two different families.
Yes. She married a man by the name of Rosenbaum, the oldest of the three sisters. And they had Victor Rosenbaum, who was one of their sons. The sports writer Art Rosenbaum, was a chronicled sports writer. His grandfather was this Rosenbaum. So they're my third cousins rather than my first cousins.
But they kept the bomb on the end.
Yeah, they did, but they're not from my father's side of the family. And so Elke Rosenbaum was the oldest sister. Reza Zimmerman was my grandmother and your great-grandmother. And the third sister was named Disha. She had about three children, and one of their children was named Hausman, that lived in New York. Now, Mrs. Hausman and my aunt, Uncle Shia's wife, were sisters. So in other words, my Uncle Shia and his wife were first cousins.
It gets a little complex there, doesn't
Yes,
it?
it does. It does. No, it was my uncle, my mother's brother, married his first cousin, who was Dish's daughter.
Oh my God. Well, it makes for a very close family that way. That's
Yes,
for
it
sure.
does.
Okay, let's turn the tape over and then we'll
Okay,
keep going.
fine.
Yeah,
Hold
but
on.
you didn't mention anything about what your grandmother did, Arthur.
Oh, we'll get back to that on site.
I don't know what she did, but anyway.
Well, you know what I meant.